So I started writing this script as an odyssey through the intersection of video games and art preservation. I didn't just want to explore the hurdles that video game preservationists face. Better writers than me have covered that topic over the years. I just wanted to see how we already preserve video games, and how we can use video games to help preserve more traditional art. And then, Nintendo announced the closure of the Wii U and 3DS eShops. I can't really say I'm surprised. The Switch has effectively replaced both of those consoles since its release in 2017, and I'm sure that, from a business standpoint, those shops were losing more money than they made for Nintendo. But, as days of social media discourse have pointed out, this business decision comes at a potentially catastrophic cost to players. Obviously, that means you can't purchase or download any new games to your Wii U or 3DS. But it also means that if you purchased and downloaded a game onto one of those consoles and then deleted it or lost its SD card or whatever, then you can't get those digital copies back on that console. Ever. The only 100% legal way you'll be able to get a copy of that missing game is to find a physical copy of it from a third-party seller.
Copy that.
Who, given the recent annihilation of the supply of those games, will likely mark up its price by a few orders of magnitude at some point in the future. With all of that in mind, it's easy to see why the discussion of this move immediately escalated into one about the preservation of video games as an artistic medium. If these art pieces are controlled by the companies that publish them, and those companies can just delete them from the face of cyberspace without providing any reasonable legal alternative, then there's a real risk, no matter how small, that some of these games might be lost forever to the sands of time. We should put the question of corporate control on the back burner for a second, and acknowledge that the art form of the video game is inherently harder to preserve than other, more traditional forms of art. Consider the painting. You can go to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam to find the physical, original copy of this painting that goes super hard. And if you don't have the budget for a trip to the Netherlands, then you can probably find a really high-quality digital copy of the painting. One that even preserves some of the textures and brushstrokes. Movies can be preserved in similar ways. Like, if you wanted to watch Ghostbusters, you could pick up a DVD copy of it from your local library, or stream it from the Criterion Channel, or even go to Zach Bagans' Haunted Museum in Las Vegas to see some of the film's original props. None of this is to say that preserving digital art from across the ages comes without hurdles. Just that the lack of interaction or hardware restrictions means that you can experience these works in full in more or less the same way they were intended to be experienced. The inherent interactiveness of video games, though, really complicates questions of preservation and approachability. Like, because video games are made to be interacted with, you can't really get the full artistic expression of a video game by watching gameplay of it, reading analysis of it, or poring over its code. Imagine trying to fully experience that Van Gogh painting that goes super hard with just a written description of it. You could get a pretty good idea of what the painting is like and how it feels to look at it, but you'd be missing a vital chunk of its essence. So because interactiveness is inherent to video games, we need to preserve games in a playable state. To that end, putting a game like Pac-Man in a museum or a library or a digital archive with limited playtime would be fairly easy and provide a fairly comprehensive experience. Like, does it really take more than a few levels or minutes of playtime to tell that arcade games are bullshit and the ghosts are fucking hacking? But how could you give a game like, I don't know, say, Mass Effect, that same artifact treatment? A playthrough of a narrative-driven game like that could take a few dozen hours at a minimum, not including any side content. And once we start discussing longer, more mature examples of the medium, we have to dive back into the issue of corporate control. Consider console-exclusive games, the tragically mortal lifespan of the console hardware that these games run on, and how that might impact the preservation of these games. This tweet sums up the issue pretty elegantly, I think. And because these companies ditch consoles every few years, rights holders have no financial incentive to maintain their libraries. so they take them down. Rights holders also have no financial incentive to re-release or remaster every game in their library for every new console, or to make their consoles backwards compatible, so they end up leaving hundreds of games in the lurch. Rights holders do feel like they have a financial incentive to stop losing sales to piracy, so they crack down on less than legal emulation. To that same end of IP control, AAA rights holders joined the Entertainment Software Association, which actively lobbies against libraries and museums having legal access to their games. So you're unlikely to 100% legally preserve video games in any museum anytime soon. And even if you were, video games aren't great candidates for that kind of preservation, and this is depressing. There's gotta be some reason to hope for the preservation of video games. Something at this weird little intersection of art critique that's doing some good. Well, for that, we should boot up Minecraft. The Uncensored Library is a collection of forbidden journalistic works compiled by Reporters Without Borders from some of the lowest-ranking countries on their World Press Freedom Index. Of course, journalistic pieces are closer to literature than traditional art, and even then they're a far cry from literature, but I think it passes the vibe check for creative works worth preserving. Anyway, these forbidden works have been censored or banned by the governments they criticize, or have come from authors who have allegedly been silenced by those same governments. Such works include selections of articles from the recently, allegedly, murdered and dismembered Saudi journalist Kamal Khashoggi, from 12 murdered or missing Mexican journalists, and from the banned Russian publication Grani.ru, among others. The library also includes a collection of World Press Freedom Index reports on 181 countries. Every one of these texts is housed in tiny books in an absolutely massive neoclassical library, again, in Minecraft. Now, hopefully you can see why Minecraft books might not be the ideal medium for visually representing these works. The Minecraft books chop the original articles up into microscopic bits, which can cut sentences off mid-page. Along with removing the article's images and paragraph structure, Minecraft books make these pieces less organized and much harder to read. That being said, Minecraft might actually be an ingenious platform for these texts. As I've mentioned, these state-critiquing articles are subject to heavy censorship in their respective countries of origin. Through the gauntlet of firewalls and takedowns and heavy revisions, the youths of these countries might struggle to find any information that runs counter to state-approved narratives. And for that, their critical thinking skills will likely suffer, leaving them unequipped to combat the very injustices that those censored articles did. But Minecraft, the single most popular game in the world, isn't subject to those same information crackdowns. So, Reporters Without Borders reasons, these governments won't bat an eye when some youth boots up Minecraft. It's just a kid's game, after all. How could they learn anything subversive from digital Legos? In fact, I think the presentation of this library and all of its colorful, blocky glory can help conceal its subversive intentions from outside observers. The main hall of the library and its various courtyards, while impressive in scale and vaguely academic looking, could just be the main hub area of any major Minecraft server. Any of its massive hallways could just be leading to different game modes or minigames or something. What's more, Minecraft allows for a kind of whimsical museography, that's a word I learned while researching this video, that is both stirring and visually unrecognizable as museography. So the information kraken, meant to symbolize the Russian state's systematic efforts to control the internet and the tightening of its grip around journalists, might become a minigame hub, a raid boss, or just a cool community build. And the Labyrinth of Truth, meant to symbolize the Vietnamese state's efforts to obstruct its citizens' access to independent information, could easily just look like some kind of maze game. Even though it only holds a few articles from a handful of journalists in 4 countries, the Library of the Uncensored shows us that video games, in their infancy and digitality as a medium, can subvert the usual methods of state control and censorship, and preserve art in the second digital homes of those savvy enough to access them. But what if you want to do a little museography of your own? It would take you months to build something like that with a few friends, let alone by yourself. Maybe Minecraft isn't the best game to build your own art museum in? Occupy White Walls, abbreviated as Occupy White Walls, we don't need to abbreviate it, is a sandbox architecture and art appreciation game. Basically, players can build out a virtual space with thousands of architectural assets and use that space to curate a collection of visual artworks from all over the world throughout history. Players can open their gallery to other players and visit other players' galleries in turn. Now, it's probably too late in the video to admit this, but I don't know anything about art or art history. As this comment in the Art Through the Ages gallery puts it, I'm of the I know what I like school of art history. So normally, I think the concept of a game like Occupy White Walls wouldn't be super approachable to uncultured dum-dums like me. Like, how would I even start searching for art? Am I just gonna have, like, Van Goghs and Monets because those are the only artists I can think of? What if I don't like Van Gogh and Monet? What if they suck and I look like an art noob? The developers seem to have realized this and created Daisy, an AI tastemaker. It takes away a lot of that anxiety by just showing you a grid of pictures and adapting its suggestions based on what you like. I have to pause here and just gush for a second. As an art discovery tool, Daisy is incredible. Troglodyte that I am, I didn't have a favorite painter until Daisy introduced me to the work of Ivan Aivazovsky. And just look at how this man painted water. I've never wanted to lick a painting before, but look. It's the wettest thing I've ever seen from the standpoint of water. And for that, I put it in C tier, Ghibli Water reigns supreme. The social aspect of the game feeds into art discovery too. Since when you're walking around another player's gallery and see a painting you really like, you can walk up to it and buy a copy. Daisy even learns from those kinds of purchases, so you're likely to find more paintings like that in the future. But while it's cool to see those systems of approachable art appreciation interact, the gamification of art discovery makes Occupy White Walls a less than ideal candidate for art preservation. Like, in order to refine Daisy's recommendations, you need to play more of the game in order to get more credits, in order to buy more art, which is all pretty time-consuming. Plus, even though the art discovery mechanics are cool, the lack of a search bar or tags to actively seek out new art yourself makes it just that much more difficult and tedious. Each piece of art comes with a blurb describing a bit about the historical context of the piece and maybe the themes it was meant to explore. It would be cool if you could do a little keyword search for dates or themes or feelings in the curated description of a piece, but Daisy's still cool for now. Because Occupy White Walls makes art appreciation so simple and broadly approachable, the building out and curation of an art gallery takes center stage. Remember earlier when I said the Library of the Uncensored had a kind of whimsical museography? Well, Occupy White Walls puts that to shame by turning the act of museum curation into one of simple, affordable, and approachable self-expression. The game gives players access to thousands of cheap, beautifully rendered building blocks and says, go nuts. Players can present their art in a more chronological fashion, in the halls of a traditional museum. They can present them by the artist, like in an actual art gallery. They can present them in no particular order at all, like random decorations for an abstract dreamscape. They can even present only Spanish art in a traditional Spanish house with a whole theater in the backyard. Museography in Occupy White Walls takes on a uniquely personal aspect, opening up all kinds of creative and unorthodox interpretations of the art it preserves. The game feels like a democratization, in a way, of fine art, a thing usually reserved for the rich, powerful, and money laundering. It facilitates the creation of new, personal, and out-there ways of preserving and presenting more traditional art as only a video game could. That just makes me wonder, though, what would a video game curation version of Occupy White Walls look like? How would a video game preserve its own medium? Perhaps the most direct example of what I'm thinking of is Dim Bulb Games' Museum of Mechanics Lockpicking. The game is light on unique mechanics and narrative context, just dropping the player into a museum with 3 wings for 3 different genres: RPGs, immersive sims, and miscellaneous. Each of the wings contains playable versions of the lockpicking mechanics of several different games. Each is presented like an artifact in a museum, complete with a plaque detailing the historical context for the minigame, a rundown of its mechanics, and an analysis of why those mechanics work the way they do. The museum itself leaves a lot to be desired, I think. As it stands, the museum just kind of looks like a warehouse or a barn, decorated by a few spotlights, signs, ornate locks, and a mysterious door that only opens when you've picked every lock in the museum, revealing something you'll have to discover on your own. In the 3 genred wings, the lockpicking minigames are sorted roughly chronologically. In the role-playing games wing, you can see the lockpicking mechanics for Dungeons & Dragons immediately to your left, and the lockpicking mechanics for Fallout 1 and 2 just to its right. So you're very likely to check out D&D's relatively simple D20 roll against a difficulty class mechanic for lockpicking first, and then immediately check out how Fallout adapted similar mechanics for a computer game. And speaking of relatively simple mechanics, let's discuss the museum's minigames on the whole. Since they've been reverse engineered from their parent games, some aspects of the minigames get lost in translation. The itch.io versions of the minigames, for example, use programmer art. This bare-bones art has the benefit of showing very clearly where all the moving parts of a minigame are and how they interact. But this also erases a lot of the mood and context for the original minigames. When this programmer art is paired with strictly functional mechanics, the resulting minigames can feel floaty and unresponsive. Lifeless, in a word. A far cry from the feel of the original minigames. Worth noting is that the Steam version employs professional art that, while it does help the minigames feel more like their original counterparts, still doesn't quite hit the mark. But the reason for the museum's bare-bones museography, God I am getting so much mileage out of this word, and less than flashy lockpicking minigames, is because they don't need anything more. The museum exists primarily for aspiring game designers to understand the evolution, permutations, and inner workings of a single video game concept, lockpicking. It has to be, and is, a damned good collection of research, analysis, and deconstruction for scholarly types, not lockpicking Mario Party. Okay, I would play the hell out of a crime-based Mario Party, I'm not gonna lie. The Museum of Lockpicking Mechanics is a blueprint for a video game that preserves video games, even if it only preserves a minor part of them. What's more, the presentation of the museum and all the information and analysis it chooses to show the player makes it ideal for developers who want to create their games in a historical context, or even video game scholars looking to learn the history of such mechanics. But what would a broader, more approachable version of a literal video game museum look like? I swear this isn't some video essay brain gone too far take, but I think it would look something like the Super Smash Bros. Series. Please don't click off, I'm about to justify this. Most analysis begins and ends with Smash Bros. As a fighting game, and or the competitive scene that's popped up around it. Which, I mean, is fair enough. Smash Bros. Is a fighting game, but its selection of fighters, stages, and music cuts both wide and deep across video game history and offers players a glimpse at an approachable video game museum. When I bring up Smash Bros. Potential as an approachable video game museum, your mind might have immediately gone to the trophies of Melee, Brawl, and Smash 4. These 3D renderings, depicting Smash Bros. Fighters and paraphernalia from their original game series, remind me of statues in a museum. And like statues in a museum, or the lockpicking minigames from earlier, each trophy comes with a digital plaque detailing the subject and its home game. While this triumphs as a simple, effective, and honestly kind of fun way to preserve information about video games, it certainly fails to preserve the games themselves. Worse, though, is that players can only unlock trophies through in-game achievements, story mode progression, or random chance during regular rounds of Smash Bros. With the items on. So the trophy system only really preserves art and information about some games that are relevant to Smash Bros. And even then, it's only available to those with the time and skill to obtain them. So overall, trophies aren't a great way to preserve video game history. But Smash Bros. Appreciation for the subject didn't stop at trophies. Spirits, which act as Smash Ultimate's replacement to trophies, preserve even more. When attached to a fighter, they provide unique stat bonuses and a special ability that's kind of related to the actual character. Like equipping Charmander gives you his weakness to water. You can collect spirits by beating their encounter either in the campaign mode or in a menu called the Spirit Board. I bring this up only because the spirit encounters do something really cool. They use Smash Bros. To simulate a combat encounter with that character in their home game. One of my favorite examples of these encounters is that of the Magneton spirit. The game pits you against 3 metal Pac-Men in a stamina fight on a power plant-only version of the Pokemon Stadium 2 stage. The 3 metal Pac-Men look as close to 3 Magnemites taped together as any Smash fighter could. Pac-Man lacks any of Magneton's electrical moves, but the electrical hazards of the stage try to make up for that. And finally, the HP mechanics of the stamina battle ensure you'll be chipping away at Magneton's health just like in the real Pokemon. All of these simulacrums and approximations meld together to preserve a JPEG of Magneton and the general vibe of a fight with Magneton, which, in terms of preservation, is so nebulous as to be useless. And, like trophies, these spirits are progression gated, limiting what they preserve to the eyes and ears of those with enough skill and free time. So while spirits are far from perfect, they represent a unique way for a video game to preserve other video games. A way that even preserves some facsimile of the interactivity of its subjects. When it comes to preserving interactivity though, Smash Bros. Peaked with masterpieces. Tucked away in the bottom right corner of the Vault menus in Brawl and Smash 4 is the Masterpieces section, containing timed demos of watershed games from the NES, SNES, original Game Boy, and N64. Other than the timer, the games are presented to the player without comment, basically as they would have been played back when they were released. In terms of approachable video game preservation though, the Masterpiece system is by no means perfect. Obviously, the libraries for these Masterpiece sections only preserve a handful of games each. What's worse, the games that are there have those awful little timers on them. The timer cuts short sessions of older home console games like Super Mario Bros. And arcade games like Donkey Kong, preventing players from experiencing those games in full. The RPGs of the Masterpiece collection suffered the worst from the timer, allowing a player to only play 5 minutes of a several-hour-long game that emphasizes story and character progression like The Legend of Zelda or Earthbound means that all they might experience of the game is its tutorial. And I think we can all agree that that's the worst part of any RPG. Despite its flaws, the Masterpiece system might be the closest Smash Bros. Comes to anything resembling video game preservation. Which is ironic, considering that new copies of Smash 4 can only be purchased on the Wii U and 3DS eShops, which, I remind you, Nintendo will be shuttering in March of 2023. Look at that. We've come full circle. By now, you might be wondering what the point of this video is. I mean, real-life video game museums, physical places where you can actually go and interact with video game history, exist all over the world now. As for digital archival, emulation will nearly perfectly preserve a game, and it's remarkably easy to set up an emulator nowadays, even if acquiring ROMs rests in a firmly gray legal area. And if you can't, or don't want to risk, emulation, then the Wayback Machine has hundreds of classic PC and arcade games in its archives, all freely available to play in your browser. I think these are all genuinely wonderful options for video game preservation that we should continue to fund and support and use. At the intersection of video games and art preservation is a community of talented, creative, and passionate people that live in the looming shadow of the boot of capital. And I see what'll happen to Smash 4 in March of 2023, and I can't help but worry. If Nintendo's attempts to preserve its own history buckle under the weight of its corporate interests, then who's to say the same won't happen to those other modes of preservation? What happens to Maid's vast collection or Occupy Whitewall's galaxy of galleries if they run out of funds to keep the lights on? What happens to the Wayback Machine's archive of classic games or the Museum of Mechanics' library of analysis if some big publisher decides their copyright is being infringed? What happens to Smash Ultimate and its eclectic presentation of video game history when Nintendo decides to close the Switch's eShop? I don't know. But I do know that our current system of economics runs counter to the preservation of video games and of art in general. And I hope someone archives this video so that future generations can do something about it. Because for now, it's been like 2 weeks and I'm done editing.